Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast with longtime NFL linebacker London Fletcher is brought to you by Compassion International. Go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum, $38 a month, releasing a child from poverty. That's the impact that you can make by doing this every single month with Compassion International. We want to invite you to make room at your dinner table to help a child who needs you. Food, education, medical care, vocational training, all done in the name of Jesus. That's the great work being done at Compassion International. $38 a month. You can make a difference in a child's life by releasing them from poverty. Here's the website again, compassion.com/sportspectrum. Compassion.com/sportspectrum. Sponsor a child today. Today's guest on the podcast, London Fletcher, played 16 seasons in the NFL with the Rams, Bills, and Redskins. Won a Super Bowl his second season, Super Bowl 34, with the then St. Louis Rams in 1999. That was the Kurt Warner Greatest Show on Turf team. London made 4 Pro Bowls in his career, and here's the thing about London. His story is incredible because he played college football at Division III John Carroll. Not 1AA, not Division II. We're talking about Division III John Carroll. Not many players in the NFL played in Division III college football, but London did it, made it from the Division III level all the way to the NFL, and then never missed a game. 16 years, played 16 games. If you do the math, 256 consecutive games played by London Fletcher. Incredible. One of only 5 players in NFL history to play in over 250 consecutive games, and he played the linebacker position. So that is a position where you're hitting someone on every play, and this guy never missed a game. Incredible story. But he also, even more, London came from a family that was broken, and he had some real hardship and tragedy that he dealt with during his young years, during his teen years, growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, in a very tough area. And London shares that story with us here on the podcast about what that was like. This is part 1 of a 2-part conversation with London Fletcher. And on this episode, part 1, we take you through his journey as a child, growing up, a sister being killed at the age of 17, a mom getting caught up in some things she shouldn't have been doing, a family tragedy, just some things, difficult things growing up in London Fletcher's life and what that was like. Some incredible stories, too, that he shares. We also talked to him about being selected as a nominee for the class of 2019 Pro Football Hall of Fame. So lots of great things happening with London Fletcher, and we're just delighted to have him here on the podcast. So here's part 1. Part 2 will be released tomorrow. Here's part 1 of our conversation with 16-year NFL linebacker, 4-time Pro Bowler, now working with CBS Sports as an NFL analyst. London Fletcher joins us here on the podcast. Take a listen to part 1. London, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
It's good to catch up with you. You and I first met, gosh, it's got to be 7 or 8 years ago now, during my time at ESPN, and you came in for the day and did the car wash and went through a bunch of interviews and getting that sort of broadcasting itch way back when. And now here you are as a CBS Sports NFL analyst. How's the broadcasting world treating you?
It's going great. I do remember that time coming up to ESPN, man. It was a whirlwind. I can remember talking to my agent about possibly wanting to, give broadcasting a try. And next thing I know, about 2 weeks later, he had me up in ESPN doing a car wash.
That's right.
So, as you know, I mean, that's a lot. But it was great just to see what it's like. And from there, I continued to do stuff just while I was still playing. And once I retired, CBS Sports Network hired me, and I've been on an NFL pregame show called That Other Pregame Show. Comes on Sunday morning from 8 to 12 Eastern time. It's a great been a great transition for me. I like the people that I work with, and it's been really something that has helped me transition out of the National Football League.
It's hard to believe it's actually been 5 years since you retired from the NFL, and the only reason I would know this is because it was announced by the Pro Football Hall of Fame that their list of 102 nominees for the class of 2019 has been released, and your name came up on that list, which is so cool. And on February 2nd of next year, they'll announce the 2019 class, and it'll be unveiled. But still, how did you feel about hearing your name on a list like that? That had to be a pretty great moment.
It was, just to think about kind of my journey, my time, the things that I did to get into the league, and the time I spent in the National Football League, and all of the ups and downs, and just like, man, to finally have an opportunity to be nominated for the Pro Football Hall of Fame as a guy, came from a Division III school, undrafted, undersized, all the different things, and to be considered one of the people that they think is Hall of Fame worthy. That's definitely humbling, and I'm honored by that.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about your journey, the football journey, in a minute. Playing, like you said, Division III John Carroll, and you go on and play 16 seasons in the NFL, and you play in every single game in every season, which is still unreal to think about, especially with your position at linebacker. But let's go back. We like to do this on the podcast and kind of hear journeys of people. Your journey was one that was not easy. I think even more for just making it to the NFL from a Division III school to even just playing football and making it out of where you grew up in. And in many ways, it's a miracle, both on and off the field. So take us to growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, and tell me about life as a kid and what that was like for you.
So I grew up in the inner city of Cleveland. I was one of 5 kids that my mom had. I was the middle child. I have an older brother who's 9 years older than me, older sister who's 6 years older than me. She was actually murdered, years ago when I was 11 years old. Yeah. And then, I'm the middle child, and I have a sister that's 5 years older, and then another sister who's 7 years older than me. But just growing up in inner city of Cleveland, it's probably like a lot of inner cities. Just there's different challenges that you face every time you walk out the door, and sometimes there are challenges that you face even when you're, inside the home, whether it be, different types of addiction, whether it be drug addiction, alcoholism, whatever the case may be. And a lot of that was present in my household. And then when you went outside, there's the violence, the crime, more drugs, all the different things. And but the community was a close-knit community. I had a lot of friends that, we played all the different sports in the neighborhood, basketball, baseball, football, whatever the case may be. It was tough, but you definitely had to stay focused. And if you were focused, you can do some things in life because you're just used to experiencing a lot of different things, at an early age.
Yeah, you mentioned, obviously your sister being killed at the age of 17. Your mother, I know, was caught up in drugs, and I don't believe your dad was around, and reading some stories about your family growing up and just being a kid. That I know you mentioned focus. Was sports sort of the outlet to get away from just all of that? Because that's a lot to deal with when you're a young kid.
Absolutely. It definitely was an outlet for me, and something that helped me kind of hone in and focus on, helping. It was a goal. It gave me a goal that I could accomplish. My sister, who I mentioned, that's 6 years older, that was 6 years older than me, that was murdered. She had got into a street life, life of drug use and abuse and different things, and she ended up being murdered, right before she turned 18 years old, and she was killed by some railroad tracks, left dead. her body, she had been stabbed, raped, all those things. And that had a traumatic effect on my mom, as you can imagine. She turned to drugs a couple of years later and really battled drug addiction up until her death about 12 years ago. And it was something that was a trickle-down effect, as you can imagine, with myself, my other two sisters here. We are, I'm 11. My one sister was 6, and another sister was, I think, 4 at the time of, my sister's death, and then my mom, having her issues. It just had a trickle-down effect, and, you're just dealing with so much. And for me, sports was an outlet for me, somewhere where I could kind of go and find peace and just, get away from everything that was going on. My dad, he didn't live in the household, but he was always a part of my life. He's no longer living either, but he was always a part of my life. But he just wasn't in the household, so it's different when you're, when the dad is or the father's not in the home. He lives across the other side of town, but it definitely was some challenges that we faced, and sports for me was what helped me, kind of get out of that situation.
In a 2012 article that was written for Sports Spectrum's magazine, you're on the cover of it, and you shared with us in that story a time when you stared down death as a car pulled up alongside of you during your teen years. I'm just wondering if you could share the story with us, I'm not asking you to share it to just say, oh, wow, look at how serious this was, but I think this was just an idea or I guess a picture painted of the kind of life that you were kind of walking in with sports, but then there was dangerous where you were in many cases.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was, maybe about 19 years old, possibly 20. I can't recall the exact age I was, but my cousins, I had some female cousins where I got into an argument with another female at like the corner store, and so I came by, and it was just nothing really didn't escalate too bad, but I got into it with one of the guys who was out there, and he was an older gentleman, so he went to his car and he drives by. As he's driving by, he points out a double barrel sawed-off shotgun, and he's pointing at me. And kind of the mindset that I was in and the place that I was in at that point, where it was okay, you know what? It's just my time. I was of the mind. I wasn't about to run. It was just like I didn't care if he pulled the trigger or not. It's just like, this is death and violence is happening so much around me and in that community. It was almost like, okay, it became the norm. So I just looked at it like it's just my time. So I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just froze. Not froze. I just stood there and just looked at him and was like, you know what, I guess, it's my time. And he ended up, fortunately, he just sped off and didn't pull the trigger. But, that was just kind of the mindset and the space that I was in at that moment.
And I know faith is important to you now. We'll talk about it in a little bit about when your walk with the Lord began. I know it was during your playing years where, God had a profound impact on your life. But what was it like growing up? Was faith, talked about, thought about growing up in such a dangerous area and such a tough area? Was faith at all a part of your life?
In my house, we went to church a lot when my grandmother was living, and once she passed, not so much. So in elementary, we went to church all the time. We were doing vacation Bible school. We were all day Sunday at church, things like that. So it wasn't for a kid. It was like, man, I don't want to go to church. So yes. It's like, man, we're here all day. But our grandmother was so important to her, like we didn't have a choice. Once she passed, nobody else was really forcing us to go, or once you kind of got middle school, high school, and you can kind of use some different things to or conveniently deal with friends. I was doing during that time. didn't go to church anymore. But our family, they would go to church periodically, sporadically, things like that. But it wasn't always an all the time thing. Nobody was, really emphasizing having a relationship with Christ. And, for a good, when I was able to really make decisions on my own, it wasn't like I had Christ at the center of my heart, the center of my life for a number of years. It wasn't until I was maybe about 30 years old. I think I want to say 29, 30 years old when I finally really gave my life to Christ and truly started walking in his righteousness.
Tell me about how your growing up and all that you saw and experienced has affected you now. We usually don't talk about the now this early in the podcast, but I think it's important to ask because you're now a dad and you have 3 kids and now you're retired in your early 40s. What did that sort of lifestyle growing up have as an effect on you and the way that you now are as an adult, being a dad, being a husband?
It definitely has me where I value family and structure and the marriage and, just wanting to be in a 2-parent household for my children and, just being able to let them be a kid and not have to worry about, not have to grow up fast like I was forced to, and like so many kids are forced to because of the circumstances and situations that they're in the home. So, I just really just like focusing on, letting my children be children, but also, having Christ at the center of our life and, attending church regularly and praying with my children, things like that, and praying with them and praying for them and doing stuff like that to, really let them know how important a relationship with Christ is in their lives. Just letting them know that, the things that we have, these are blessings that from God, from Christ. So this is just, that's how I guess I look at it now. It's so important to me having that relationship with Christ, especially getting from, the place that I was able to come from.
So tell me how you were able to get out of what you were in, as a kid, and you mentioned sports being an outlet. Tell me, was there a person in your life? Was there people in your life that were able to kind of, take you under your wing and help you kind of focus on the sports thing? Because obviously by high school, I have to imagine, you're becoming a pretty good football player because you go on to play in college. So tell me about just how you got out of it all.
So when I graduated from the 6th grade, there was a Jewish husband and wife, and they started this program in Cleveland called the I Have a Dream program, and it was initially started by a man named Eugene Lang. It was initially started in New York City, and the whole premise behind it was if this class is able to graduate high school and get accepted into a secondary, higher learning institution of their choice, they'll help provide scholarship money for us and for the children. So they donated. Back then, it was like $250,000. I don't know what that would be. With inflation, what that equivalent would be right now, but
it's a lot.
It was like 71 high school students. 71 kids in my 6th grade elementary class, and out of those 71 kids, maybe like, less than 20 really took advantage of it. But so they had promised this money for college, but they also went above and beyond for me and helping me get into a really prestigious Catholic high school where it was sports was really a big deal there, and a good football team, good basketball team. But I went there initially to kind of further my basketball aspirations, and they helped me pay the tuition there. My family couldn't really afford it, so that really helped me get out of my situation. I eventually only played 1 year of high school football, played more basketball. So I took a basketball scholarship to St. Francis University in Pennsylvania, but it was because of those people. Her name is Charlotte Kramer. His name is Leonard Schwartz. Them, just adapting our class and saying, "Hey, this is going to be money here for you for college." But not only that, just saying, seeing my talents and saying, "You know what? Let's put London in a better environment to see if we can help him, possibly earn a scholarship in basketball at that point in time." And it happened for me.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned basketball. You won 2 state championships as a basketball player in high school. It's kind of funny thinking of you as the Iron Man in the NFL, and yet you're a basketball player in high school, and you go on a basketball scholarship before returning to Cleveland and then transferring to, as you mentioned earlier, Division III John Carroll University when you switched full-time to football. Obviously, looking back, it was the right decision because God brought you where he has brought you and through to where you are now. But how difficult was that for you to make that decision to pursue football over basketball?
It wasn't. I wouldn't say difficult. I wouldn't say it was difficult. I had always loved football, but just basketball, I guess, was my first love, and it became for me once I transferred from St. Francis to John Carroll. I started playing both sports, and basketball became more of I didn't enjoy it as much, and football was new, exciting, different type of challenge, and it was like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do now. And I still, would play basketball like in the, pickup and stuff like that. I just wasn't competing in games like I had been accustomed to all my life. But football was just fun. It was fun to me because it was new, it was exciting. I can take out a lot of my frustration and anger that I was still dealing with, hit somebody.
Yeah.
And so it was just kind of seemed like a natural fit for me.
And we do appreciate London Fletcher for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. That was part 1 of our conversation. Part 2 will be released tomorrow morning, and that's where you really want to take a listen there because you'll hear how this man played 256 consecutive NFL games. We'll also ask him tomorrow how important it was for him to play hurt and never miss a game, and what the closest time in his career was to him missing a game. And it's a pretty cool story. We also ask him about just life right now and the importance of putting his faith and trust in Christ, which did not come until his NFL career. During his time with the Buffalo Bills about 12 years ago. So he was just about 30 years old when he came to Christ. And that's really a cool story as well. So stay tuned tomorrow for part 2 of our conversation with London Fletcher here on the podcast. We thank you for joining us. As always, you can reach us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You can find us on your YouTube channel. And you can also subscribe to this podcast through Apple iTunes Podcast and leave a review as well. If you subscribe, we'd love to have you leave a review. Let us know what you think of the podcast. And as always, you can reach us directly via email to me, jason@sportsspectrum.com. Let us know what you think of the podcast. If you have any guest ideas, both big names and stories we probably haven't heard of, high school coaches, peewee coaches, young kids, whatever it is, great stories that intersect sports and faith. We want to hear about them. You can email me, jason@sportsspectrum.com. We also want to thank our partners, Compassion International. Go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum for $38 a month. Your sponsorship provides access to school, medical care, food, vocational training, and the opportunity to know Jesus. We're talking about releasing a child from poverty. And over 150,000 of these children have come to know Jesus Christ as their Savior through the great work being done at Compassion International. You can give a child hope by releasing them from poverty. Go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum, compassion.com/sportsspectrum, and sponsor a child today. Thanks so much for listening to this episode, part 1 of our conversation with London Fletcher. Stay tuned for part 2 coming tomorrow morning here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time.